Welcome back to part 6 of Always Bet on Bard, chapter 9 of a Thora Silentblade tale. The next morning started with a nice breakfast at the hero's hearthstone and then a visit down to the town center for registration. The crowds were starting to gather up around a fenced area in a field, jostling for a position to get a good spot. A few of the challengers were already meeting up in the field, standing in front of large banners advertising the contestants' team name. While Allendale registered their group at the main booth, Thora tried to get a look at the competition. Surrounded by tall tourists blocking the view, the dwarf pushed through towards a pile of nearby wooden crates. Climbing up and looking out over the crowd, Thora could see that many of the teams were unarmed, dressed in casual clothing. The soldier felt a little out of place, equipped with all the steel and leather armor, but it was a little late now. Climbing down, Thora rejoined the others as they took to the field. The event announcer was just now shouting out to the crowd and naming some of the teams that had already arrived. Isolated cheers went up for some of the newcomers, possibly family, but the large share of the applause and support went for last year's champions. When Allendale's team was announced, there was some scattered polite applause, but they were unknowns here. That would change soon, Thora was sure of it. Dwayne was kneeling on the field, examining the large wooden board that had been placed before them. The board was square in shape, several feet across, and featured what appeared to be a maze. Small holes were placed throughout the maze, but it did seem like the general idea was to get from some starting point on the board to the exit point of the maze. However, it was far too small for it to be a challenge for any of them. The path was very straightforward and could easily be figured out. What were they supposed to do? The answer soon arrived, muzzled and wrapped in a trench coat. The small white rabbit was slightly larger than normal, but tiny enough to fit inside the walls of the maze. As the announcer shouted out the challenge rules, Thora watched the rabbit in the maze, poking about, trying to find a way to get the muzzle off. "Why would you need to muzzle such a tiny rodent?" asked Thora, kneeling down near the board to get a better look. "He's so fluffy." The sound of the starter horn was the only answer the dwarf got as the various teams jumped into action. Shouts and encouraging cheers surrounded the field as the spectators all urged on their favorites. Thora and the others lifted up the board from each corner, trying to figure out how to get the rabbit through the maze. Currently, it seemed quite content to simply sit there. It was the wizard, unsurprisingly, who came up with the plan. Dwayne tossed his floating duck onto the maze, and Thora then added a few bits of meat to the top to get the rabbit moving. It gladly jumped up to try to get the food, frustrated by its inability to pick any of it up with the muzzle in the way. The poor little thing didn't even get to have its snack before 2 nets were tossed onto it by the others in the crew. With their rabbit firmly attached to the floating duck platform, it then became a game of balancing. Working together, they tilted and bumped and did anything possible to move the duck over the walls of the maze and toward the finish line. With eyes closed, Thora concentrated on the final push, steadied both legs. Focusing again on the board, the soldier bent, swerved, and twisted, the stout dwarven frame seemingly defying the laws of physics. As the bunny crossed the finish line, they heard a shouting voice crying out, 18 seconds, Team Allendale!" causing a huge cheer to erupt from the crowd. A loud curse could be heard across the field as last year's champions took a pause to glare at them before returning to their board. Only a few seconds later, they were complete as well, confirming that both teams would now face off in the final challenge.